Okay, so I'm going to show you something today that is often overlooked, but it is worth knowing, and that is about the voltage regulator rectifier, which on second gen Viragos, it doesn't matter if it's a 700, a 750, 1000 or an 1100, all the same in that regard. It is bolted onto the back of the left passenger's footrest on the left side. So with this one you have to remove two screws, well, two 8mm bolts, and on the back of it there is the voltage regulator, as you can see. Well, hopefully you can see. Yes, you can. So that is the regulator. That is basically something, a so-called shunt regulator. In order to understand how problems arise with this one, you need to know how the charging system works as a whole. So you have the generator here, which is permanent magnets spinning around coils. It has three phases and it has AC output, which means it's alternating current, not direct current like our battery needs. So we need to rectify the voltage, and then we have to make sure it does not go over 12 volts, and that's what this thing does. Basically, when the generator induces voltage or electricity, some of it will be used to charge the battery and the excess will be dumped. This is a shunt regulator, which means the excess will be shunted, will be grounded against the frame or against the ground, which is basically the frame, because the battery negative is bolted to the engine and the engine is bolted to the frame. So this is on ground like this, or the battery negative. So the point is the excess goes to ground, and usually these things overheat if they cannot conduct properly against the ground. As you can see, the frame is not painted, and that is the original paint job. So my frame hasn't been powder coated or anything. This is the original paint. As you can see, where this meets the frame is just bare metal. Of course it is oxidized because it is a 34-year-old bike, but the point is it needs to be grounded really well. So if the conductivity between this point or the ground itself and between the regulator housing, which is the ground for the regulator because it has no ground wire, mind you, the early first generation Viragos had regulators with multiple wires, not just three white ones, sorry, which were the three phases from the generator, and the red one, which is the 12 volt regulated output. They also had a ground wire and optionally a couple others, but the point is that second gens and 535s included, they don't have a ground wire, because Yamaha assumed that the ground is here, bolted to this, so there's conductivity, metal to metal, and again this bolted to here, so metal to metal connection again. But over time these surfaces will get oxidized and the conductivity goes to shit, which means we need to clean this thing. First of all, we have to make sure that the surface on the frame is clean. We have to make sure that the threads on the bolt that holds the whole thing are clean. We have to make sure that this surface is clean, and of course the mating surface between the regulator and the footrest bracket is clean. So we are going to start with the regulator. We're going to take it off and I'm going to show you how to clean it up to improve conductivity and hopefully save your regulator rectifier, so you don't have to buy another one. Oftentimes you see people complaining about multiple regulators going bad on them after a few months. Usually that happens because this thing, the conductivity, is overlooked, and even though the regulator is brand new, it cannot do its job because it cannot dump the excess energy to ground because it does not conduct properly towards the ground, if that makes any sense. So first of all, we are going to take this thing off. I try to put the camera down, find an angle so you can see what I'm doing. So let's get to it. It has two Phillips lookalike JIS screws, and it also has a little hook that holds onto the wire. So I'm going to pry this up a little bit. Yeah, that will do. And now we can undo these two. Mind you, most of the time these are totally gone and oxidized and seized up. So if you can, use an impact screwdriver. As you can see, that's crusty. So that's one. Let's do the other one. There we go. And as you can see, someone tried to do something about conductivity in the past, because that one is sanded. But we can always do something about that. So instead of sandpaper, we're going to use a brush first to get the crap off of it. Just like that, nice and shiny, as you can see. Now, to improve conductivity and keep this surface clean, there are certain chemicals that you can buy. Mike Miller usually recommends a little paste. It comes in little tubs or small tubes. It's called Noalox, which is basically some conductive grease with aluminium in it. Very, very fine aluminium. That protects the surface so it will not corrode. And on top of that, it will also improve conductivity. So when they are not contacting perfectly, that still conducts some. So yeah, I'll give it some sandpaper as well, because whoever did this before me, they used a very, very coarse paper. Yep, that should do. So yeah, that's nice and clean now. The other thing we need to look at, see that? The back of the regulator. That's pretty mucky. I'm sure that this does not conduct properly. So I use some WD-40 just to loosen the grime up, like so, and then again wire brush most of it off. Like that pretty much. And just to make sure it is totally clean, I'm going to use some sandpaper. So as you can see, it's nice and clean. Of course it has darker spots, but that is pretty much down to metal now. And we can put this thing back where it belongs, in this sort of position. But before we do that, I'm going to wipe everything off properly. I'm going to use some copper grease, if anything, as an anti-seize, because the next time when I take this off to clean it, then, you know, it will be much easier that way, because this won't happen with copper grease. So I smear some copper grease on the screws, some on the other one too, and an anti-seize. And I'm going to use 2 new washers as well. I'll start with this side. So, apologies, we had to skip a few minutes ahead. The thing is, I had my, well, I struggled to put this thing back in place, because this seems to be an aftermarket regulator. Of course, I should have known that because there's no text on it. Usually the original one is made by a Japanese company called Shintagen, and they have 42H printed on the back. The problem is, oftentimes the Chinese clone the whole thing, including the text, so at this point this is not really relevant. However, this might be a Tour Max, which is Japanese, and they just have a sticker. Maybe the previous owner took it off, or it might be one of these cheapy Chinese ones, but funny enough I haven't had any problems with it, although I would not recommend using the cheapy Chinese ones, because quite often they cook batteries because they are pretty crap. Now there's only one thing left to do. Once we applied some copper grease on the threads, tightened everything down, put the wire clip back in place, and everything is fine and dandy. There's only one place we need to fix now, is this contact. In this case I'm going to do the same thing, use my brush and maybe a little bit of WD-40 to get rid of the corrosion. As you can see, the brown shit that is forming, that is basically rust leaving the surface. And now you can actually see that the frame is absolutely uncovered, not painted in a squarish shape. And let's finalize with a bit of sanding. Okay, let's see how it looks. It's much better, isn't it? That's alright. And now we clean this surface as well. That's basically it. We can bolt everything back together. As I mentioned, you can use Noah locks on this surface and behind the regulator, or between the regulator and the footrest bracket, in order to improve conductivity. Are we in focus? Yeah. So you can use some of that paste here, or you can use some of that paste here. That will prevent oxide or rust from forming, and also helps conducting electricity, of course. So this one is back to normal, and I shall put that back as soon as I can finish fixing my rear brake, because during this lockdown it's really difficult to get parts.